Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Work Inspired podcast. I am your host, George Lucas Pfeiffer, and today we have an incredible episode for you. Our very special guest is Susan Schmitt Winchester, Senior Vice President and Chief HR Officer for Applied Materials, which is a massive global semiconductor company headquartered in Silicon Valley. Susan is also the co-author of an incredible new book called Healing at Work. Today, we're going to dive into the culture and ways of working at one of Fortune's most admired companies, as well as uncover how as many as 2/3 of us are subconsciously being impacted professionally by experiences that happened in our childhood and in our past. Get ready to find out how the workplace can be used to change ourselves for the better. Get ready to work inspired. Susan, thank you so much for being on the show today. So excited to speak with you. I know we've got a lot to talk about, but thank you so much. You're busy and your time is very valuable. So thanks for dedicating some of it to our show.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Well, let's start because we've got a couple things to discuss. I want to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing at Applied Materials, and then you've got an exciting book coming out. So a little bit of a two-part episode here. But why don't you start by just giving our listeners a little bit of a background on your professional career, kind of leading up to what you're doing now?
Sure, I'd be happy to, George. Thank you. So I have worked in human resources for now 33 plus years. I joke with my friends and family that my middle name is HR. I love the profession. I'm very fortunate to have been able to work in a number of Fortune 500 companies. I've served as head of HR for 2 of those companies now for over 14 years, and currently head of HR for a company called Applied Materials. We're a $17 billion company based in Silicon Valley. And the semiconductor industry is hot. So it's very exciting. So yeah, I've worked in HR all those years. I've worked in pretty much every job of HR, and I love the work. Excellent.
Applied Materials is really, I mean, like I was doing a little bit of research on your company, and you guys have some incredibly notable designations. One of the world's most admired companies, one of the most sustainable companies in the world. I mean, tell me a little bit about the culture that you guys have created at Applied Materials that has gotten you some of this recognition.
Well, it's an amazingly special company. I feel very privileged to have been selected to join them back in 2018. And we have a CEO, Gary Dickerson, who is a visionary, passionate, inspired leader. And his vision for our company, for our future, actually just recently the company changed its mission statement to be very focused on the societal impact of what we do. So in the past, it was all about making possible the future technology for the world. Now it's about making possible a better world for everyone, basically. And because of his vision, and where he's positioned the company and his passion for our customers, that goes throughout the entire company. And so the piece about our work on environmental, social, and governance is really outstanding. So he shared about almost a year ago at one of our big industry association meetings, his vision for our ESG strategy, and really put in place a framework around how do we impact the one-time effect, which is how do we run our operations, the 100-time effect, which is 100 times impacting our industry, the semiconductor industry, and then how do we impact at a 10,000-time level the electronics of the world, and how do we help sustainably with our products, our technology, how we run our own operations. And of course, that's galvanized lots of people in the company who've come together cross-functionally, our product technology people working on sustainable products, our supply chain organization, HR, environmental health and safety teams. And a big piece of this, of course, is our culture of inclusion. And how do we really become a company where great people can come and be who they are and be valued and accepted and have fair and equal opportunity for advancement and development. So it's a really fun place to be. I'm inspired, and I'm not surprised the company is being recognized by a number of different organizations.
Do you find that when a company like yours that has a clear mission that is dedicated to sustainability and making the world a better place, that has this ingrained within its culture, from your perspective as head of HR, do you see that it's easier to attract the right people and keep the right people on your team?
Absolutely. Purpose matters. People want to work for companies where they are aligned to the company's purpose. And I love how Gary shifted the purpose to be all about making possible a better future for everyone. And it really starts with, our relationship with our employees, our relationship with our customers, especially given all the things that have happened over the last year with COVID. We kept front and center that we had two priorities. One, maintaining and building trust with our customers, our employees, our suppliers, our partners. And secondly, coming out of the pandemic even stronger. And as a result of that, you just see this, pulling together as an organization, doing whatever we can to support our people all over the world, and continuing to find creative ways to support our customers. And so, it's just a really special place to be. And so, purpose matters. I guess that's my point.
Definitely. How many team members does Applied Materials have?
We have about 24,000 employees, and we also work with a great team of contractors, about 12,000 contractors. So we're all over the world, Asia, Europe, and US, and 24,000 full-time employees.
Yeah, you mentioned the change that we've experienced in the last 12 months, and we talk about this. I mean, we started this show right as COVID was hitting back at the beginning of last year, and every episode we've discussed it, and some of the short-term and long-term impacts of this pandemic. Tell me, how have you had to adapt the way that your team works, or the way that you continue to strengthen your culture, your internal communications? Has the pandemic had any sort of an impact on that from your perspective in HR?
Absolutely. I don't know too many HR leaders who could say no. So it was dramatic. Obviously, everybody literally went from everyone showing up at work every day to everyone staying home. And then literally within about 24 hours, obviously the semiconductor industry was deemed to be an essential industry. And, so when we look at our global workforce, George, about 70% are already coming on site. We have a large number of people who are on site at customers, our customer engineers. We've got many thousands of those individuals who are on site with our customers. We also have manufacturing. We're making extremely technical, high technology equipment to support our customers. So about 70% of our workforce is already working. They have been working the whole time. And then also our engineers working in the labs. So about 30% of our global workforce are working remotely, and it varies by location. Some locations, our headquarters location, it's a higher percent than that, but roughly 30% of us are all still working remotely. And then during that whole period of time, sort of this combination of some on site, some not on site, I would say that through the world of technology, we were able to come together in ways that we never did before, in terms of, we've never really leveraged technology to do all employee meetings where we could actually bring everybody together. We typically would do a live meeting, it would get recorded, it gets shared around the world. Now with the pandemic, we've become so much more virtual and so much more adaptable virtually, that it's actually created this entirely different experience to bring people together. So a perfect example, something we started doing that we hadn't done before, although I'm not sure why we never did it because it's really cool, is we've created these people manager meetings where, they were instigated, or we began them during the pandemic, when we just needed to communicate directly to people managers, sort of the frontline, leaders of the company, making sure they had up-to-date information about different policies, pay levers, time off policies, everything going on with COVID. So we literally created this like a panel of HR leaders and our EH&S leaders, our facilities leaders, getting on a phone call, literally a Zoom call, or Teams, I guess it was, and just putting out some slides, information, and then letting our managers ask us anything. And get this cadence of relationship, this building of relationship. We're all in this together. We're going to answer every question we can. If we don't know the answer, we'll capture it and we'll get back to you. Really, I just love it. We've done some of that with our leaders in Asia. And so I don't know. I just feel like the company came together. And again, keeping the whole focus of trust with our customers, our employees, our suppliers, our partners at the forefront, their health and safety, and then also finding ways for really creative communications. So I think culture's actually gotten stronger. Now, the continued drain on people working from home, and there's some great research out by Microsoft. I just read a report that they put forward, is that we are becoming a bit too siloed. So we spend a lot of time with just the people we're normally working with. So we have to find ways to make sure we're looking at building cross-organizational relationships virtually. But yeah, it's been a whole different ballgame of learning how to work together and support getting information into the hands of the people that need it.
Yeah, very interesting, especially, you're a global company, so there was opportunity before the pandemic to connect remotely, to all your different offices around the world. But it's very interesting, I think, talking to a company like yours that was an essential, business. So you had people that continued to work throughout 2020. And then you also had people like yourself or, people from HQ that were home, so everybody's trying to figure out, what does this future look like, where there's this mix of people that are in person and then in a remote capacity to some extent. Have you figured out certain practices or policies that work better than others as it relates to maybe somebody that's even without the pandemic, you would have been in person? It's not the geographic problem of connecting digitally. Have you guys figured out kind of a way to balance out what might be post-pandemic ways of working, in a flexible scenario where maybe people are in the office 3 out of 5 days a week? Is there any advice that you can share for all the rest of us that I think, a lot of industries, we're all remote because we weren't essential and we had to go, and maybe there are certain pockets, but I think that's the big question on people's mind is, what is that hybrid going to look like as the vaccines roll out and we come out of hopefully out of this pandemic sooner than later?
I think it's a great question, and I think it's going to be very specific to each company. Every company's got a different makeup of its workforce. And so all I can share is how we're thinking about it. Obviously, talking to a lot of other chief HR officers also. I think the year of 2021 is going to be a year of experimentation. And so I think certainly at our company, as well as other companies, are going to be experimenting with different ways of working. And, you got to balance the business needs. So the business and the customer needs are key. We're in business to support our customers, and also trying to figure out this piece around employees' expectations, desire for flexibility. And we're actually right in the middle of it. Tomorrow, we're going to be launching another pulse survey of our global workforce, asking for their input on a variety of different things about how we work going forward. And that's for everybody. It's not just people that are working remotely, but also our team members that are working on site too. And so I don't think it's going to be a one size fits all. I think business context is going to be a key consideration. And as the war on talent gets even more intense, we've got to figure out a balance. I don't think this is not a problem to be solved. It's not either you come to work or you stay remotely. It's a tension to be managed, right? You've got the tension of the business requirements. You got the tension of employees that have benefited and value more flexibility. And so how do you create solutions that manage that tension as effectively as possible? We don't know all the answers right now, but I can tell you that this idea of let's experiment. Let's not make major dramatic changes immediately, but let's try some different things, taking the input from our people, the role requirements, the business needs, and try to figure out if we can come up with some solutions that help balance those tensions. And I personally believe that flexibility has got to be a key ingredient, because it's hard to find great talent. And I think the companies that will differentiate themselves in the future will be able to figure out that flexibility piece as well as meeting the business needs, but it can't be just the business needs or just flexibility. It's got to be a combination of both. And so we're going to experiment. We're going to try some different things and learn some different things and adapt as we go.
So well said. I mean, the fact that we've seen more peer-to-peer sharing than ever before. I think that people are very interested to understand what other organizations are doing, but also knowing that you're absolutely correct. It's a individual, unique solution for each business, and a lot of it is very much an experimentation so far. And I think flexibility goes two ways. One, it's the concept of we're going to allow for more flexibility with the way our teams work, but it's also we're going to put in place policies and solutions that are flexible enough to change, because this is an experiment and we don't know exactly what the right recipe is yet, and we'll probably be still figuring it out over the course of the next few quarters. So wonderful advice, and congratulations on the success that you guys have had and the culture that you've built. It's fascinating and seemingly very well deserved of the recognition that it's got. Let's switch gears now to something I've been really excited to talk to you about. Your new book. It's coming out in the beginning of May 1st, I think. Is that what it is? Yep. So Healing at Work. Tell me a little bit about the concept of the book and what inspired you to. Is this your first book?
It's my first book, and my co-author is Martha Finney, who the magic of Martha Finney has really brought this book to life. And yes, it's my first book, so I'm very, very excited. It's been a lifelong dream, and it's been a long journey, but I am excited because I believe that this book will transform people's experiences in the workplace. In really so many people, me included, for many, many years of my career, think of the workplace as a place of stress. I think, I don't know about you and your role, probably there's no stress in your job, but the workplace can be a place that's challenging, right? Mm-hmm. And what I didn't realize for so many years of my career, my success was really fueled by an underlying need that I felt that I had to always prove myself. And it was, I guess you could call it the overachiever syndrome, but no matter what I achieved, it was never enough. And it never really filled whatever it was inside of me that was empty. And so there was this realization along the way that I was really, I don't know how else to explain it, but living a very unconscious, wounded career path and unaware about how much my dysfunctional childhood, we didn't talk about that when I did my intro, but the research shows that about 2/3 of us have experienced one of the 10 adverse childhood experiences, which are pretty negative things: emotional abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, mental illness in the family, addiction, criminal behavior. There's this list of 10 things. I didn't realize how much my upbringing shaped my belief system, my negative beliefs about myself, and how much that was draining me in my job, and how much it was fueling my overworking, work-life balance, beating myself up at night when I felt like what I'd done at work wasn't enough. And as much as the success was outward, looked like a great career, internally, it was a miserable place to be. And as I became more aware of my limiting belief that I wasn't good enough, somehow I walked away from my childhood with that belief, and I adopted some strategies to help me navigate that childhood, which were people pleasing and perfectionism. And the companies I worked for love those behaviors because we're always trying to please everybody. And I know there are a lot of perfectionists and people pleasers in the corporate halls, the executive halls of a lot of companies. But the drain and the impact on my life was negative. And I look back now at those years where I was using work to try to get validated in terms of, somehow decided it was everybody else's job to determine if I was good enough. That was not my job. My job was to show them I was good enough. But the impact in terms of the relationship with my kids as they were growing up, I don't feel like I was present for them. It certainly took a toll on my former marriage because I was just too consumed about trying to achieve something, to feel something that I was never feeling. And so kind of in this place of too much stress, anxiety, and worry, which often for a lot of people, including me, leads to addictive behavior. It could be drinking, shopping, eating, overworking. All those things are pretty common. But how do you teach people that they don't have to live that kind of a career? And actually, that's exactly what Martha and I do in the book, is teaching people to go from this unconscious place of our careers, which is, there's a guy, Jeff Pfeiffer, who wrote a book called Dying for a Paycheck. I don't know if you ever saw that, but it lays out all the negative side effects of the workplace. And what Martha and I do in our book is we actually teach people how to use the workplace as a laboratory for emotional healing. And I love our cover. It's got the bumper cars. I don't know. I'm excited. We finally have the book proof.
Very cool. Yeah.
The bumper cars reflect conflict at work. And I don't know. Have you ever had conflict in your workplace?
Probably more often than I'd like.
Yeah. So Martha and I call them bumper car moments. And actually, the bumper car moments is when sometimes we crash into somebody else at work or they crash into us and we have a negative reaction, negative emotions come forward. Those are actually the best times to practice new ways of responding. And if we're not in this conscious place of managing ourselves and our careers, we can very quickly go into the spiral downward into the stress, anxiety, and worry. And so that's a long answer to your question, but I'm very excited about the book because I do think it's going to help people have a very different experience in their careers.
Yeah, and I want to kind of build on that a little bit. I'm interested, though. You said that at some point along your career path, you became aware. How did that happen? Because I could see, obviously people value drive, they value success, growth, climbing the ladder, a bigger paycheck. How did you kind of take a step back and look at yourself and say something's not right here?
Yeah, actually, there was a major turning point for me when I was in my first really big vice president job. So I was the head of HR for a multi-billion-dollar business, and all my strategies, all my people-pleasing strategies, perfectionism strategies that had worked for 15 years in my career, all of a sudden were backfiring. So I was trying to prove myself to this new group of leaders. It was 9 leaders on the team, 9 men and myself. And no matter how hard I tried, it was like I was pushing them away. And 11 months, I'd go home, I'd drink my Chardonnay, I'd beat myself up, felt terrible. I was lost. I thought, oh my gosh, this is executivehood. This sucks. I thought I better update my resume. I don't think it's going too well. And I was very fortunate to have been investing in an executive coach at the time. And I was in tears. I was really upset. I felt like I was not adding any value. And she had me do an exercise. And this is really, it's going to sound weird, but it had a huge impact on me. She said, I want you to pick of all the guys that are in this group, which ones are the worst? Who are the worst to you? So honestly, there was one guy who'd walk down in the morning just for fun, slam his fist on the window just to watch me jump. I was like, wow. Entertainment, right? So out of the 9 guys, I picked 4. And then she had me imagine, she said, I want you to imagine that you're in their eyes looking at you. And if they had to pick an animal to represent you symbolically, what animal would they pick for you? And I thought for a minute, I imagined myself in their eyes, and I started laughing. I said, oh my God, I'm a golden retriever puppy dog. All I want him to do is pat me on the head and tell me I'm being a good girl. And, it was sort of silly, but that's what I was, this sort of weak little puppy looking for attention. And then he had me get back in my eyes and tell me what animal would I pick for each of them. And there was a grizzly bear, a gorilla, a wolf with long fangs, and a hyena circling and laughing, but ready to go in for the kill. And she said, how's that little puppy dog doing with those ferocious animals? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was so focused on trying to please them that I was this needy, weak energy. And it was this conscious awareness of, I don't have to prove myself to these guys. And so she actually had me adopt a different animal. I picked a lioness, stronger, more powerful, will fight if she needs to, but not necessarily go looking for the hunt. And with a lot of, initial support in terms of coaching for each one of these 4, rough guys, just start taking them on, coming from a total conscious place of, I'm not the puppy dog. I don't need you to validate me. That's not your job. That's my job. And it totally changed the whole game. And that was probably one of the very first wake-up calls I had on becoming more conscious about how that people-pleasing perfectionism and frankly, fear-based behavior of not being good enough was influencing how I showed up at work.
It's fascinating. And in your book talks about, you mentioned it, these list of 10 things that can kind of contribute to that perception. And these are from your childhood. You call them ACEs. Where did that concept come from? Is this research that has been done? Did you come up with the term ACE?
I did not.
Tell me a little bit about it.
This was a research study that was, I believe it was sponsored by Kaiser Permanente, major health organization in California. 2 doctors, Dr. Felipe, I believe, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, and Dr. Ananda. And they did this research, I believe it was with 17,000 adults in the United States. And they basically asked the adults these questions, 10 questions related to the 10 adverse childhood experiences. And what they discovered was shocking, that 2/3 of the population that were asked the questions, 2/3 had experienced at least one of the adverse childhood experiences. And I believe 40% had experienced 2 or more. I think it's almost 13% have experienced 4 or more.
Wow.
And there's amazing research. There's a book called The Deepest Well by Dr. Nadine Burke, who started noticing that kids that showed up in her pediatric office who were experiencing health issues, she started to create linkages between their own childhood traumas. And so there's also another gentleman named Dr. Bruce Perry. Actually, he and Oprah Winfrey have just written a new book that's coming out at the end of April that also, he is probably one of the world leading experts on childhood trauma in the ACEs research. And basically what the research shows is that if you've experienced one or more, it puts you at higher risks of a variety of different health related problems, heart disease, cancer, all kinds of other things. And so, from my own standpoint, I never, ever would have associated the word trauma with my childhood. I had some challenges in my childhood with my dad, who had a lot of issues with anger, but I always thought there are a lot more people who have a lot worse than I do. And so the concept of childhood trauma, it was like a concept that didn't connect to me at all until I went to a program called Healing Trauma. Somebody had recommended it to me at an organization called Onsite in Tennessee. And it was a 7-day program. And I discovered in that program that actually things that had happened when I was younger, in some cases are considered a small T trauma, so not like a major T. There were some major T's, big T trauma or little T. But what they explained was you could have a lot of little T traumas throughout your childhood, chronic minor traumas that can together cumulatively equate to a big T trauma. And actually, when I take the ACEs survey myself, of the 10, I experienced 5 of the 10. Wow. And my co-author Martha experienced 8 of the 10. And so this concept of, I sort of disassociated with my childhood. And this isn't about blaming parents or anything like that, but it was recognizing that there were some challenging things in my childhood. And actually 2/3 of the adult population, the research would suggest, have experienced one of those 10 or more. And the reality is it does affect our brains. It does affect when you're in a situation when you're younger and you're constantly in a state of hypervigilance, trying to manage, like for me, it was managing my dad's unpredictable rage. So when you're in a state of hypervigilance and trying to manage the environment, your brain changes. The cortisol, the stress cortisol, is released more frequently, which is the research Dr. Perry does. I'm no neuroscience or scientist or anything like that, but it does. The brain adapts in abnormal circumstances as ways to manage it. And what's interesting about the impact in the workplace is that and this is before I was conscious of this, if something happened at work where a boss was angry at me, I immediately went into freeze, fight, flight, or freeze. I would freeze. I would shake and tremble. I would want to cry and run and go hide under my bed. I had a manager a long time ago in my career who literally had a little statue she would leave on her desk. One side of the statue was Glinda the Good Witch, and the other side was the Wicked Witch of the West.
Yeah.
And she would change that little statue on her desk every day, depending on her mood. So she was the Wicked Witch. You didn't want to be anywhere near her. And one time, I won't go through all the details because we don't have time, but she got really angry at me. And I remember sitting in her office, the Wicked Witch was turned towards me.
Oh, no.
Statue on her desk. I was brand new in my career, and she just had an all blown out rage fit at me because of something she perceived I'd done that she thought was not right. And in that moment, I froze and just teared. All I wanted to do was run away and hide under the bed with my dog, like I used to do when I was little, and so it was debilitating. I felt like she'd cut me off at the knees. And actually, she left the organization. I actually left before she did, but it was totally inappropriate now looking back at it. But in the moment, I thought, I'm bad. I've screwed up. I'm in trouble. And it's that gripping fear of whatever it was that we dealt with. My gripping fear when I was little was my raging dad who scared the heck out of me. And, in the middle of a professional setting, completely getting lost in the trigger of being in trouble. That was a huge trigger for me. Fast forward now, I was in total unconscious state, total unconscious. It was the scariest thing that ever happened to me, short of, my dad being so angry. But now fast forwarding, and which is exactly what we teach in the book, is how do you use those bumper car moments? How do you manage an angry boss in a way that isn't coming from this unconscious wounded place, but it's coming from a conscious healing place that I'm an adult. My childhood reality, you're not coming to work with me today. I'm going to deal with this as a grown-up and manage it. And we teach readers in the book how to navigate the bumper car moments in a completely different way. And ultimately what we're teaching, which is my life purpose, is we're teaching self-acceptance to create a more fulfilling, successful career in your workplace as well as in life.
Yeah, very, very fascinating stuff. I'm thinking about the audience for your book. I mean, clearly, like you, there's a lot of people out there that have no idea that they've had some sort of thing happen in their past that might be carried with them to the way that they are living or working today. 2/3 of Americans, I think you said, 2/3. That's a big number that have one of the. I'm thinking about the readers that use your book to identify something that they might not be cognizant of. B, to figure out, all right, how do I have just the knowledge that this is actually going on right now, and then what can I do about it? But then there's probably also a subset of people that, if you're leading people, just knowing that this could be impacting 2/3 of your team, that's powerful in it of itself, just to be aware and have empathy for what the way that you interact with people or the way that you manage interactions between other team members. So is your book focused on leaders, or is it more general? I know it's focused on the workplace, and I do want to ask you a couple more questions about the idea of healing in the workplace, because you just gave a couple examples of how we bring some of this past baggage, maybe that's not the right word for it, but we bring that into the workplace, and it perpetuates itself with these interactions that we have in these bumper car moments. But tell me, from your perspective, who's the kind of the target audience, the target reader for your book?
Target reader is broad. It's executives, leaders, and professionals. So I personally believe that individuals and companies will greatly benefit from the book, for themselves or for a family member or for a colleague. My greatest hope is that I can get to as many of the executives and CEOs and leaders, not only of companies, but of nonprofits, of countries, of communities, global communities, to influence how the top executives and leaders are thinking about how they shape culture and how they shape healthy companies. That's ultimately my biggest goal, is that I reach as many leaders that can influence the company experience as possible. And I also am a realist. I mean, I worked with employees for years, all my years, and I see the pain and suffering that's happening when someone's working for a leader who's angry, aggressive, corporate bully, whatever category you want to put them in, is that can create so much negative stress for people deeper in the organization that just having the awareness from the book will help people better navigate that. But ultimately, I'm trying to change companies. And I can do it at an individual level, but I also recognize it has to be done at the systemic level. And so the role of leaders and executives is a key element of my target strategy, my target audience.
Gotcha. And when you talk about the idea of healing, obviously the medical sense is you've got a wound and it heals and it's gone, right? So when you talk about trauma, especially trauma that happened as a child that you've now been living with subconsciously for decades, maybe, that's something that can heal, and you can use the workplace and these interactions to practice or promote that healing?
Absolutely. There are a couple things about the workplace that make the workplace a perfect place for healing. I don't know if you're familiar with Martin Seligman's work on Flourish, positive psychology. He's got a model that I love, and Martha and I talk about it in the book, which basically says that there are 5 things that are necessary for someone to flourish. And actually, all 5 of these things are achievable in the workplace. I hope I can get them all right. One of them is positive engagement. So the company hired you because they thought you were the best one to do this job. So immediately there's this positive emotion, this positive experience. So positive emotion is the first one. The second one is engagement. It's all about, do you feel engaged? And because you talk to lots of HR leaders, that we all care about the engagement of our workforces. We're asking them, we're launching a pulse survey tomorrow to find out how people think and care about how we work going forward. So PE, is the third one is relationships. That's another ingredient to flourishing, is you have to have positive relationships. Think about all the relationships we have in the workplace. Oftentimes, people's best friends are who they're working with. So that's relationships. PERM is meaning. A lot of companies, we join companies because of the purpose of those companies. I love applied materials because it's about making possible a better future. So aligning a person's values and meaning to the company's purpose and meaning. And then finally, let's see, PERA is accomplishments, is making sure that we can achieve, that we have an opportunity to accomplish things. And that's what the workplace is all about. So this model PERMA, PERMA, all 5 of those ingredients to flourishing are achievable in the workplace. So that's the first thing I would say. From a healing standpoint, is this becoming aware of the unconscious wounded career path and the conscious healing career path. That's kind of the first step of realizing that maybe my negative emotional reactions and the stress and anxiety and worry that I'm experiencing may have more to do with some outdated scripts and limiting beliefs that I can choose to do differently. And that's the other piece of the book, is weaving in the neuroplasticity research and the positive psychology research that says we can actually rewire our brains. Our brains are plastic, and we can rewire our beliefs and reactions to negative things that previously set us down this path to spiral into a lot of pain and suffering. And so the healing concept is using the neuroplasticity research, the positive psychology, the opportunity for all these positive things that can happen in the workplace, and then using those bumper car moments, the conflict moments. Those are the clues that if I'm having a negative reaction to some kind of a conflict that you and I just had, it's a clue to say, here's an opportunity to practice rewiring your brain. You don't have to do this through the unconscious wounded brain. You can do it through the conscious healing brain. And here are some techniques to do that. So that's the healing piece. And the journey, it's hard to look forward to conflict, but honestly, when it happens and we have an overreaction, that's the first time to say, I got to manage my trigger, because this is a clue that I can do this differently. I don't have to take on all this outdated energy about how I'm supposed to feel, what I'm supposed to do, how I should be self-comforting myself because I feel so poorly because of what happened. The healing happens through all the practice. And we've got a whole section in the book called Bumper Car Moments in Action. I could do 100 bumper car moments because of all the experiences that happen at work. Getting missed for a promotion, being misunderstood in a meeting, being interrupted in a meeting, a manager not calling you back. I mean, the list of conflicts that can set us off with the old patterns, the outdated scripts. The workplace is a great place to practice. I don't know. We spent a lot of time there, so we might as well leverage that.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff. I think the workplace also has this, it's the professional nature of it to some extent, that there's at least some boundaries there that might not exist in some people's homes that I think make it even more appropriate to be a place where you practice this. I love the idea of practicing managing conflict and being aware of it. Very, very cool. The one question I had, and I don't even really know how to ask it, is when you talk about moving from the golden retriever puppy to the lioness, when you talk about self-acceptance, how do you pair that with still promoting someone to drive for success? Or maybe the better way to ask it is can conflict be good? I mean, good in the sense, yes, that it's a way to practice and to overcome, but can conflict in the name of innovation or disruption, or new ideas?
Yeah.
Is there a place for that in this world? Yeah.
Absolutely. So here, it's a great question. It's actually a really perceptive question. Conflict is natural, and conflict can create innovation, new ways of doing things, people challenging the status quo. Absolutely. The healing opportunity is how we manage those conflict moments rather than personalizing them, rather than beating ourselves up. We can completely handle conflict coming from our kind of what I would call our adult reality self. In other words, we don't get sucked into, it's almost like you fall into this swamp all of a sudden of all this negative emotion about ourselves. If you're challenging me and creating conflict by, opposing an idea or coming up with a different idea, that's positive. That's a healthy dynamic, as long as I don't go home and start drinking because I feel like I somehow mismanaged it, or that you were bullying me, or, it's all the internal interpretation. So conflict is a normal part of the world of companies, and it will continue to be that way for all the positive, productive reasons you've just articulated. The piece that I'm working at eliminating is people misinterpreting, because of their old scripts, their old triggers, their old limiting beliefs, all these moments of suffering because of the conflict. The conflicts are going to still happen regardless. But how do I interpret it, and how do I manage when I get triggered in a way that's much more productive and healthy, rather than this spiral down experience?
Yeah, and the really cool thing about it too is that if you can be successful, if people read your book and become aware and use the workplace to practice a healthier way to engage in or manage conflict, don't internalize it, don't bring it home, the impact might be, less aces on the next generation, right? Like a more effective way to, you're learning at work and you're taking that home into your personal life, your home life, right?
Yep. That is absolutely beautiful. I was just talking to another leader. His name's Yuri van Geest, over in Rotterdam. And we were talking about this on Monday, and he said, he introduced the concept of ancestral healing. In other words, a generational healing, that as we become more conscious of how our past are, in some cases, driving the career bus, and we can start to unwind that, we can start to impact our generations. And this idea of, the different generations of pain and addiction and anger and rage and all these things that happen because people feel rejected or worthless or unlovable or not good enough, or whatever it is. I've been talking to so many people on this journey, as has Martha, and finding out underneath everything, what is your underlying limiting belief? I can't do anything right. All these negative beliefs, I believe, are fueling the ongoing abuse, the adverse childhood experiences, I think about the impact on my own kids of being absent and too focused on trying to get that validation at work. I'm sure neglect is one of the categories in the ACEs. I'm sure they would say they felt neglected, although their dad was home. They had both loving parents, but I was distracted and consumed by my own limiting beliefs unconsciously. So I love what you just said. Absolutely, completely. That is part of this mission.
Well, congratulations. I mean, to have your first foray into being an author, the first book you're writing, to have so much potential impact and power and passion behind it, it's so remarkable. When your book comes out May 1st, where can people find it? Amazon?
It'll be on Amazon. Yep, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Amazon, it'll be Kindle as well as paperback. And then later this summer, I'll be coming out with a special edition hardcover copy as well.
Cool. All right. Well, Healing at Work. Very excited to read the entire thing. I've been privileged to get a sneak peek. So thank you for doing this very important work, Susan. It's fascinating stuff. I usually end each episode by asking a couple personal questions, although this has been a personal conversation, and I appreciate you being open and sharing everything that you have. From a professional stance, or even a personal one, for the listeners looking to kind of grow in their careers, clearly Healing at Work is a great resource that they should be checking out next month or this month, depending on when this airs. But what has been a resource that's been especially valuable to you in your career?
Well, one resource that has been incredibly valuable is, and I talk about it a little bit in the book, it's called my personal board of advisors. There was a period of time when I was at one of the Fortune 500 companies where I had 10 bosses in 10 years. Wow. And I really did not believe that my career development mattered to anybody. I didn't feel like I had anybody who was helping me grow in my career. And it was a very lonely place to be. And completely I didn't really plan it this way, but it ended up happening. I created this group of people around me that I call my personal board of advisors. And some of them were friends that I could call for a support or a kind word, my cheerleaders. Others were professional people. When I took my first chief HR officer job at Rockwell, I'd never been one before. So I was lucky that Mara Swan, who at the time was the EVP of Talent and Strategy at Manpower, became one of my personal board members. She was always there for me for advice, or Tracy Kehoe, who at the time was the head of HR at Hewitt. And I just started to build out this group of people. My former CEO, I asked him if he'd be on my personal board of advisors. So I created this support team. I'd highly recommend it. And, there's lots of different ways you can go about it. But after I realized I had this support net around me, I never felt alone. I always knew that I could call on any member of my board, depending on their area of expertise, to help me. And so that was a huge resource in supporting me.
I love it. A personal board of advisors. I'm going to do that. That's great advice.
I love it. Yeah.
So you've obviously had some great exposure to some very effective and ineffective leaders throughout your career. I'm interested to know if you had to describe a couple characteristics of those that you found to be effective, that you really admired. What were some of the traits that they shared?
I thought a lot about this, and I would say there's one overarching trait that I think matters the most for leaders, and that is self-awareness. Every one of us has issues. The reality is we all have pluses and minuses. We all have good days and bad days. And ultimately, it's about understanding ourselves. And I think our book helps a lot to that degree. But this understanding of how do I play to my strengths, and how do I manage and downplay my weaknesses? And how do I put people around me that help me do that is what I've seen great leaders be able to do. And those leaders who are not self-aware, and actually Corporate Leadership Council says 25% of people overestimate themselves, 25% of people underestimate themselves, and only about 50% of people have an accurate view of themselves. And so there's a lot of opportunity for more self-awareness.
Sure.
I think the lack of self-awareness and the lack of how our how the elements of our temperament can impact others, by my mind being perfectionism and people pleasing, I have to keep in mind that as a perfectionist, I not only set unrealistic expectations of myself, I can have the tendency to do the same thing for my team. And so being aware of that, I give my team permission to say, is this realistic or unrealistic? So it's understanding how to manage those elements of temperament that can impair us.
Yeah. So wise. Final question, and you've already shared so much great advice. So this might be just I'm pulling out one more request. If you were retiring tomorrow, and maybe you were on the personal board of advisors for someone earlier on in their career, what's a morsel of wisdom you'd pass on to them?
Well, I'd have to say the morsel of wisdom is getting onto the conscious healing career path and following it, because in doing so, you will discover deeper levels of self-acceptance. Mm-hmm. And when we feel that we've reached deeper levels of self-acceptance, we will have a more fulfilling career. That's absolutely what I would teach.
Wonderful. Well, this has been such a great conversation, Susan. I so appreciate you and your time and your perspective. Thanks so much for everything you shared today. Thank
you so much. The time flew by. I really appreciate it. A lot of fun, George. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.